they're about to drop some knowledge on us, and I'm going to pass the mic.
Thanks. Maybe I'll open real quick, mostly to pass out a thanks to our last group of esteemed physicians. Thanks for that hopeful message, and you guys teed us up pretty well on themes of generating hope and also responding to solastalgia. So thank you for that. And Brother Mustafa, I got one for you. Speaking of hope, this is one you may not have heard of, but it came up in one of my courses a while ago. Rebecca Solnit. Speaking of hope, it's not a lottery ticket you clutch to your chest on the sofa, but it's an axe you break down doors with in times of emergency. All right, I'm going to pass it over to you, Jen.
Yeah, that last act was an impossible one to follow in the best of ways. So it reminds you that story comes anywhere, whether it's a song or a poem or a film. And I think today, just listening in the sessions I listened to, is we remember how much storytelling is a deeply human creative act. It's who we are. It's also a community building and connecting act. And so it has value purely to do it. But then I'm going to sort of break the bubble and say, Terry and here are going to talk about some practical things. Because if you want to change people's hearts and minds, you really need to have a plan. You need to know who you're going to tell the story to. You need to know what that story for that audience is. You need to know what time you want to tell them that story. You need to know what channel you need to tell them the story through. And without that, you're not doing your job. I often think of it in relation to medicine. So if you created a great treatment or drug, but it doesn't get to the people that need it at the right time, then you haven't done anything. And it's the same way with story. Is the untold secret is you need to spend as much effort and money often in figuring out how to distribute whatever the story is, whether it's a video, a film, a podcast. Because if you create a beautiful thing and no one sees it, it doesn't have any effect. And so with that, I was going to talk about two things, and then Terry's going to talk longer about one thing, which is first, the distribution channel is really important, and different ages and different audiences really need different forms of content and different distribution channels. And that really is half the work. And then secondly, we're about to hear from Ed, but George Mason and Yale have done incredible work, which most of you probably know, on climate perceptions by Americans. And they divided into, for those of you who don't, into 6 groups. There are the alarmed, there are the concerned, I should know this by heart. There are the cautious, I always miss the cautious, the disengaged, this doubtful, and the dismissive. The work is done in the US, but I think it applies to everywhere in the world in just different percentages. And right now in the US, most of the people are alarmed or concerned, which means that all the work people have done saying there's a problem, they already know there's a problem. So we don't want to have more reportage excessively. We don't want to have more stories or music videos that make people more alarmed or more concerned. Instead, we really want solutions-based storytelling. And I think of solutions-based storytelling as how to. Most storytelling, if you think about it, is who did it rather than how did it. So if you read literature or you go to a film or you see more news reports, it's who did it. Who was the bad guy or who did this? But solutions-based storytelling is how did they do it? And you can make marvelous emotional stories about how they did it. It may take a little more effort, but so with that, I'm going to show you something. It hasn't aired on American television, so I'm slightly almost violating rules. This is a clip from something that's about 7 minutes. Terry is in the longer version, but unlike Cece, I decided not to embarrass him by showing him. So we're going to show some Harvard, part of the Harvard climate team. And so this is 2 minutes. It isn't titled. It has the editor's narration rather than the correspondence, but it's an example of solutions reportage.
Thanks.
one robust study with physiological.
This group at Harvard is meeting to discuss the connection between climate change and health in South Asia.
What type of environment are they working in? Are they exposed to the sun all the time?
A lot of the ways that we are conceiving of the issues of climate change are from large global models, remote sensing data from satellites and things like this. The problem is often too large to really start nailing down policies for communities and people. So we don't have that granular human scale data to understand the impacts of climate change.
What they're talking about today is very granular: how to track temperature variations, the microclimate, in places where billions of the world's poorest people live and work.
Satellite data is not granular enough.
The Harvard team partnered with the Self-Employed Women's Association, a union in India that represents small-scale independent workers, the people who make up the vast bulk of India's population.
This is the story of Madhuben. She's a home-based weaver, so she works from home as millions of informal workers do.
Researchers used small sensors to constantly track the temperature in the women's homes and workplaces, day and night.
We found that temperatures that Madhuben was exposed to, the temperatures that we collected in Madhuben's environment were much higher than the NASA power data, which has serious ramifications.
In some cases, the actual temperature was 10 degrees higher in Celsius than what was in the standard weather data. The difference between discomfort and danger.
So the cruder temperature data might tell you, oh, it's actually not so bad because it's cooling at night.
Yes.
But when you actually look at what her lived experience is, it's much more unpleasant.
It has completely different ramifications, right? And so when we're talking about global averages or diurnal variation, we're not capturing actually what millions of people are truly experiencing in these environments.
A better understanding could lead to life-saving interventions as the threat of climate change looms large.
I will just finish by saying that I think it's really important for us to address the people who are cautious and dismissive and disengaged. I think we need different types of stories often that we don't think of. And so we've, as a group, been really trying to tell business stories about how people make money, how they lower consumer costs, how renewables are driving huge new opportunities in Texas, which is the state with the largest by far number of renewable businesses and energy in the United States, which is another part of this series. We need those groups of people, and the stories we've told so far don't work for them. They're not going to change now, a decade, 15 years in. So we need, we've been working really hard to find some unique business leaders to tell longer stories and follow over time, because they're people who can reach those audiences and convince them that that climate is happening and that they have actual real opportunities within that space. So with that, we're going to talk about values.
Before I forget, do you want to tell everybody about you and your group real quick? Last week, telling everybody about this. Do you want to just introduce yourself?
Yeah, actually, so I wear three hats. One, I have a nonprofit global and national health reporting group, and we work on bigger projects with PBS NewsHour, with CNN and Sanjay's unit, with the Associated Press. So we take longer sort of deep dives into, and we're new to climate. We've been working in health, and now we decided to work in climate and health and climate because we built distribution channels and they really want to have our help. Secondly, I'm a filmmaker and a film director. So the most recent film, I spent a year with Tony Fauci, which was a fascinating experience, but I've done films of all type. It's probably my favorite art form, but it's a very expensive art form, so you have to think really hard about when you do it. And then lastly, I am an adjunct assistant professor at Mount Sinai. I'm not a doctor. I'm really interested in the intersection of trust, technology, and narrative or information, and how all those three intersect and act out in health in all sorts of ways. And I've worked more on vaccines and other types of trust issues in health inequities, but now I'm going to start working on climate.
Great, thanks, Janet. We were totally neglected talking by ourselves, which is probably default mode. But I just wanted to make sure that people were able to ask you questions after this if they wanted to. So I'll be even more brief. So I'm Terry O'Connor. I am one of the associated faculty with the University of Colorado Climate and Health Program, but also an emergency physician and an instructor of emergency medicine for the University of Washington. Thanks for presenting that one example of a solution for those that are alarmed and are looking for solutions, and actually the sense of agency that we can actually do something about this, right? And I think that was the example there. I want to, I guess, from my position as a busy clinician, like many of you, give you a little bit more of sense of agency of how you can lean into this space, because I think we all share a common value that we understand the scope of this problem. I think we understand the moral imperative to lean into this problem, but we may not necessarily feel confident to create messaging, or that someone would want to hear from us, or it just may not seem fun, right? Because it just seems kind of stressful to be on the spot or in the spotlight. But I think there's a strategy that overlaps as well with some of those who are perhaps in this concerned or cautious area, where you can help them appreciate how urgent this problem is, and also the scope and scale of it in a way that you can share something together, and that is your value set, right? And I think what you realize is that if you share a common value with an audience, not only is it fun, we're all here and we have conversations with each other all the time because we share common values, but you use those shared common values to then break down and introduce connections to things that they love or that they stand to lose with the changing climate and the changing world, right? And so I think that is something I'd like to introduce as the context for this next film that I'll share with you. You know, my personal value set is that I enjoy and love exploring the world. And I grew up under the influence of reading John Muir's writings and visiting his home and visiting all the national parks that he was pivotal in establishing, and started my initial working career with the Park Service in conservation. And then in a chance encounter, decided to become a physician. But that ethos of conservation stayed with me throughout my life. And I needed to find a way to make that full circle in my career. And as I started to appreciate the scope and scale and urgency of our ailing planet, that made me realize that I did need to lean in to this communication arena. And I found out that it could actually be quite fun and quite easy because of shared values. So, you know, my values, I love, you know, exploring the world. I think that part of that is to expand both my mental and physical and spiritual capacities. And I find that my job really, and what's most satisfying, is to give back in care and compassion and gratitude for, you know, this beautiful thing it is to live on this planet, right? And in my community and my background, I'm connected with many who are still in conservation movement, in the Park Service, and in outdoor recreation. And so what I found is that there are many organizations where I live, which is in mountainous Northern Rockies region of the United States, that are very conservation minded. But as Dr. Ed Maybach's most recent review of global literature will attest to, is that many people still can't connect kind of our degrading health of our planet with our own human health. And so there's kind of a moral imperative to share that message, but there's a way in which we can link it with someone's pre-existing value of natural conservation, right? And so the Nature Conservancy reached out to me because of mutual connections in my background in the Park Service and in my community. And we use this as an opportunity, as you'll see in this film, to play initially to kind of their the aesthetic quality of what they love, the natural environment. It's situated in a national park, which is featured in two of these photographs on the side on the stock photography here. But then connecting the pieces and what they're probably seeing, what they see as risks that are actually changing in something they love, then connecting it into something that they wouldn't necessarily think about, in the impact of the health and the economic impacts of their community, and then leading them to a solutions lens to follow up again in what was introduced by Janet. And this was part of a campaign to raise money and funds for the Nature Conservancy's efforts on natural solutions for climate change, right? Limiting deforestation, reforestation, and other projects like that. So With that, I think we'll move on to the next video, and then we might have a little time for some questions at the end.
Wyoming's 4 distinct seasons, a natural clock set by Earth's rotation and the tilt of its axis. It's driven the cycles of all life since before the dawn of humanity. The winter solstice, the shortest day of the year, where night is greater than the day. Grizzly Bear 399 and her 4 young are out longer than ever this year in search of food. With early springs and summer drought, most of the berries are long dried up. Bears must gather what final calories they can before hibernating for the winter. But not everyone hibernates. And for the people of the Rocky Mountains, winter is a time of celebration and self-expression on the slopes. Snow is the essence of winter and the foundation of water. With the warming temperatures of climate change, snow is more often rain and less predictable. Freezing rain melts snow up to 10 times faster than evaporation, leaving an impenetrable frozen layer on top of what remains.
One thing that's getting harder for wildlife is with the more rain on snow events, you're getting more of this like hard crust. That's hard for animals like elk or deer to break through to get at the grass underneath.
You can actually see red foxes, coyotes that you see diving into the snow. And the deer, you can see them on the buttes, just pawing and pawing and pawing at the snow. And
one thing it seems like we're seeing is that just the duration of winter is shorter.
I've heard that some of the big ski areas are already planning on how they're going to get their guests to adapt to a winter where it's not just skiing, where they'll do other activities. They'll come stay at the ski area, but it won't be all about skiing.
Yeah, even just from a recreation standpoint, it seems like ski resorts are going to have to be making more snow, have plans for years where there's just less snow on the landscape, open later, close earlier. It seems like it's definitely going to affect that industry.
So how does climate change affect snow? Well, we're technically still in winter, I think. It hasn't turned to spring quite yet, but it certainly feels like spring. And today, I think we're experiencing what a larger pattern that scientists have been observing, particularly in this region of the Mountain West in the United States, and that snowpack is dwindling on average as the years go by because of climate change. And with that diminishing snowpack, we then have less water runoff to help supply our aquifers and our rivers. And also it leads to quicker drying out of these communities and a higher risk of wildfire. So extrapolating from those two things, one, obviously we know the health risks of wildfire, not only direct impacts on communities that abut these regions, but degraded air quality, which has become a major issue recently. But lack of adequate water has impacts on communities in the agricultural sector, has stressors on the food supply. Obviously it has stressors on wildlife, and then recreation-related communities like this has impact on economies too. It's a profound impact on really a fundamental need going forward, and that is clean air and clean water. And if we don't reconstitute that, if we don't get our snowpack, our balance is out of whack.
Snow is melting 3 weeks earlier than in the 1970s. Ski resorts close early this year. The snowpack is far less than normal. Yet April showers bring May flowers. And we come full circle. Back to spring.
The years just seem to go flying by, and the season's even faster. After a year of us doing this and paying attention, it's really clear that if you're not watching and taking note, you don't realize how much things have changed. When my dad came to this valley, the seasons were predictable, winter especially. You knew how high the snow was going to get, how deep it was going to get. You know, there was a January thaw. It was to the point where everything had names and dates and everything, and then it started to change. And I think my dad first noticed it with the plants. He realized they were showing up earlier, and then he realized why, because there wasn't any snow, and it just kind of took off from there.
The evidence is clear. We must take action now.
What gives me hope for the next generations is that they are more engaged, I think. I'm really surprised how many younger people are not afraid to just jump in and get to work.
Protecting these things in these natural systems is exactly what's going to correct the stressors that we're experiencing. Limiting deforestation, making sure that we have natural carbon sinks that continue into perpetuity going forward from here on out is a big part of the solution.
I believe there's a lot of things we can do, and the worst thing we can do is live in fear, you know, and if we give people the ability to take action, I think this next generation is going to take that action. Protect nature in all its forms and let nature thrive. Maintain connected and resilient landscapes. Conserve water, both on a personal and an industrial level. Reduce our own carbon footprint as individuals, and support policies that work towards sequestering carbon and supporting alternative energies.
Nature is the ultimate life support system, right? And strangely enough, I think that's also where a lot of the solutions are.